Imagine waking up tomorrow and your phone is dead, the lights won't turn on, and you realize this isn't just another power outage. This is the beginning of the end of life as you know it. In the next few minutes, I'm going to walk you through exactly what happens when the electric grid fails for months, not hours. You'll discover the 3 critical phases of collapse that most people never think about, the deadly mistakes that kill survivors in the first weeks, and the surprising skills that become more valuable than gold. By the end of this video, you'll understand not just how fragile our modern world really is, but more importantly, what you can do right now to prepare for what experts say is not a matter of if, but when. Welcome to Pantry, where we turn everyday people into prepared survivors. If this kind of content helps you think differently about preparedness, smash that like button and subscribe for more eye-opening scenarios. Right now, as you're watching this video, invisible threats are lurking in the shadows of our electrical infrastructure. Most people have no idea how vulnerable our power grid really is, or how easily it could be brought to its knees. Our entire electrical system depends on something called SCADA, Supervisory Control and Data Acquisition Systems. These computerized networks automatically control power generation and distribution across the country. Here's the terrifying part. They're connected to the internet and they're shockingly vulnerable to cyber attacks. A skilled hacker, or worse yet, a hostile nation, could inject false data into these systems, disrupt load balances, or push transformers beyond their limits. The result? Catastrophic failures that cascade across the entire grid. And here's what makes this nightmare even worse. Those massive transformers that keep our power flowing are custom-built pieces of equipment. They're not sitting in warehouses waiting to be installed. If they're destroyed, it can take a full year to manufacture and install replacements. But cyber attacks aren't the only threat we're facing. Physical sabotage is just as dangerous and much simpler to execute. A few well-placed explosives at key electrical substations, or even attacks using high-powered rifles, could cripple power for millions of people across vast regions. These substations are critical choke points in our electrical system. They step voltage up or down to match what different parts of the grid meet. Destroy enough of them, and you've essentially severed the arteries of our electrical circulatory system. Then there's the threat that keeps defense experts awake at night, electromagnetic pulses. An EMP could come from a nuclear device detonated high in the atmosphere, or from a massive solar flare like the Carrington event that happened in 1859. Back then, that solar storm set telegraph lines on fire and caused aurora displays as far south as the Caribbean. If the same event happened today, it would fry the circuits in cars, generators, planes, and virtually every electronic device that isn't specially shielded. The entire technological foundation of our civilization would be wiped out in minutes. Making all of this even more dangerous is the fact that our electrical grid is aging and stretched far beyond what it was originally designed to handle. Much of our infrastructure was built decades ago for smaller populations and less demanding industries. Spare parts are scarce, the specialized crews who can make repairs are few and far between, and transporting replacement equipment across the country is slow and complicated. Our system is already operating at the edge of its capacity, and a major failure could expose just how fragile this entire network really is. Now let me walk you through exactly what happens when the lights go out and don't come back on. It starts with a simple flicker. Maybe you're watching TV, maybe you're cooking dinner, and suddenly everything goes dark. At first, most people assume it's routine. A storm knocked down some power lines, or a transformer blew somewhere in the neighborhood. Your phone still has battery life, but when you try to check social media or the news, there's no data connection. Still, hope persists. Surely the utility workers will have power restored by nightfall, right? By day 2, that hope starts to crack. Hospitals and cell phone towers are still running on backup generators, but those generators are burning through fuel supplies at an alarming rate. By day 3, a cold realization begins to set in among the population. This isn't a typical outage. Water becomes the first critical problem. Municipal water systems rely on electric pumps to move water from treatment plants to your home. When the power dies, those pumps stop working. The people who act quickly start filling bathtubs, sinks, and every container they can find. But for most people, the preciousness of water doesn't become apparent until their faucets run completely dry. Communication systems start failing as backup power runs out. Cell phone signals become unreliable or disappear entirely. Emergency services become overwhelmed or go offline completely. For people who aren't prepared, this is when the first wave of panic really sets in. They're faced with a chilling question. What if this doesn't end soon? By the end of the first week, the breakdown of normal society accelerates rapidly. Grocery stores have run completely out of perishable foods. Delivery trucks can't access fuel because gas station pumps are electric. Even if stores wanted to stay open, credit card systems are down, so only hard currency works. But even cash starts losing its value quickly. People don't want paper money, they want tangible goods that will keep them alive. Food, water, medicine, and weapons.
Pharmacies get ransacked for painkillers, antibiotics, and prescription medications. Hardware stores get cleaned out of batteries, flashlights, and camping gear. Law enforcement struggles to maintain order as their vehicles run out of fuel and their communication systems fail. If you have supplies, this is when you learn to keep a very low profile. The hum of a generator or the smell of cooked food can make you a target. During the second week, the shock of the situation wears off and gets replaced by grim determination to survive. In major cities, you start seeing rivers of people fleeing on foot. Highways become clogged with abandoned cars as fuel runs out. The water crisis intensifies dramatically as reservoirs run dry and sanitation systems completely fail. Human waste starts piling up everywhere, and waterborne diseases like cholera, dysentery, and giardia spread rapidly through the population. Boiling water or treating it with chemicals becomes absolutely essential, but fuel for fires is increasingly scarce. All the perishable food is gone by now. For people who depend on refrigerated medications like insulin, this becomes a life or death crisis. Makeshift markets and barter exchanges start popping up in various locations. Suddenly, skills in mechanics, horticulture, and medicine become incredibly valuable. The communities that have the best chance of survival are the ones where people collaborate, sharing resources, organizing security watches, and dividing up essential labor. As we move into weeks 3 and 4, you start seeing remarkable human creativity flourish out of pure necessity. People build solar stills to distill clean water. They construct makeshift wind turbines to recharge flashlights and small electronics. They learn to make vinegar from fruit scraps to help with cleaning and food preservation. But scavenging for supplies becomes increasingly dangerous as desperate individuals and organized criminal gangs start controlling resources through violence. Government efforts to repair the electrical grid are severely hampered by the chaos and lack of communication. Local survival becomes the only thing that matters. In areas where violence is common, people start reinforcing their homes and forming community defense groups. Disease, violence, and starvation are claiming lives at an alarming rate, but humans are incredibly adaptable creatures. By the second month, daily life has been completely transformed. It revolves entirely around the basics of survival. City dwellers either migrate toward farmland or barricade themselves into defended enclaves. Urban streets become filled with trash, filth, and vermin. Hospitals, if they're still operational at all, are mere shadows of what they once were, with doctors trying to save lives using minimal equipment and supplies. Mortality rates skyrocket, and mass graves become a grim reality that communities have to deal with. But even in this darkness, the human instinct for community persists. Groups of survivors work together to build crude water filtration systems. They collaborate on farmland trying to grow food for the community. They salvage solar panels and other equipment to create tiny microgrids that can power essential devices. Skills that seemed obsolete just months earlier, gardening, animal husbandry, food preservation, suddenly become lifelines that determine who lives and who dies. Friendship and loyalty networks become more important than blood relationships. New families form, united not by genetics but by the shared struggle to survive. Isolation becomes incredibly dangerous, while collaboration becomes essential for survival. Thieves and scavengers prey on vulnerable individuals and small groups. Official institutions are largely absent. The line between healthy caution and destructive paranoia becomes very thin, but traces of human resilience start appearing as people find ways to work together despite the chaos. By the third month, major cities have been essentially gutted. Municipal services have completely collapsed. Disease spreads rapidly in cramped, unsanitary conditions where people are forced to live together. Starvation becomes a constant threat for anyone without access to renewable food sources. In the most extreme cases of desperation, history shows us that humans sometimes resort to cannibalism, though thankfully this remains rare even in the worst circumstances. Governance becomes chaotic and inconsistent. Some local authorities try to enforce martial law, but their reach is extremely limited. Militias and warlords start controlling resources through intimidation and violence. Travel becomes incredibly perilous. Highways turn into junkyards of abandoned vehicles, and functional roads are often patrolled by armed gangs looking to rob anyone who passes through. Bicycles and sturdy boots become more valuable than cars ever were. The survivors who make it this far start establishing daily routines: carefully rationed meals, manual labor, patrolled perimeters, and simple crafts to create necessary items. In some areas, a semblance of order begins to emerge. In others, chaos continues to reign supreme. The communities that manage to stabilize start forming rudimentary councils to make group decisions, resolve disputes, and organize security. Trade begins to reappear as villages exchange eggs, grains, salted meats, and other essential goods. By the fourth month, the relentless anarchy of the early weeks starts to subside, mainly because population numbers have dropped dramatically. The survivors adapt to a much slower pace of life, waking with the sunrise and resting when darkness falls. Agricultural efforts expand as former office workers learn the hard realities of farming. Salvaged solar panels and small hydroelectric equipment become incredibly prized assets used to power lights and communication devices. Skills that seemed ancient and obsolete make a comeback. Candle making, blacksmithing, soap crafting, and hand sewing fill the gaps left by the disappearance of mass production. Trust becomes a valuable resource in its own right. Betrayal can completely unravel the fragile social fabric that communities depend on for survival. Communities hold regular meetings to allocate farmland, organize patrol schedules, and resolve disputes. Some areas see the rise of petty dictators who control resources through force. Others manage to maintain more democratic, shared power structures. Trade relationships and alliances start forming between communities, encouraging mutual benefits and cooperation. But every journey outside your immediate area involves significant risk. Even amid all the hardship and loss, new social bonds form. Communities share both sorrow and the small victories of survival, forging relationships that become as strong as family ties. By the fifth month, the enclaves that have managed to survive start developing real organizational structure. Clear roles emerge within communities: farmers, security leaders, medical personnel, mechanics, foragers, and teachers. Education becomes focused entirely on survival knowledge, basic literacy and arithmetic, crop planting techniques, and animal care. Children need structure and hope for the future, even in these circumstances. Long-term survival depends entirely on practical skills: planting and maintaining crops, preserving seeds for future seasons, storing and managing water resources, and caring for livestock. Communities build protective enclosures for their animals, harvest and store fodder, and create hidden caches of supplies to spread their risk. Skilled trades like carpentry, blacksmithing, and midwifery become the absolute cornerstones of community survival. Medical care relies heavily on creativity and knowledge of herbal remedies. The emotional trauma affecting survivors is pervasive and severe. Depression, survivor's guilt, and chronic anxiety haunt people constantly. Nights are long and dark without electric lighting. Communities organize regular gatherings where people share stories and songs, trying to keep morale from completely collapsing. Simple conversation becomes a form of therapy, reminding everyone that they're not alone in this struggle. External threats continue to be a constant concern. Raiders, organized criminal crews, and local tyrants pose ongoing dangers to peaceful communities. Defensive strategies range from simple fences and improvised booby traps to organized guard posts and patrol schedules. A single violent raid or disease outbreak can unravel months of careful progress and preparation. By the sixth month, it becomes clear that the old world is truly gone. Electric power lines remain dead and useless. Population levels may have dropped by a third or more from disease, violence, and starvation. The countryside becomes a patchwork of small settlements, each with its own rules, customs, and dangers. Some communities trade peacefully with their neighbors, others remain secretive and suspicious or openly hostile to outsiders. Urban centers are divided between small groups of tenacious survivors and wild animals that have moved in to fill the empty spaces. Militias and security councils gradually evolve into local governments, rationing scarce resources and controlling access to water sources. Control of essential resources means control over people's lives. Some leaders genuinely try to rebuild and create better communities, others descend into tyranny and exploitation. Human ingenuity continues to manifest in remarkable ways. Small dams generate modest amounts of electricity, solar panel arrays power radio communication systems, and communities maintain contact through short-range broadcasts. For children who were born during this blackout period, this harsh new reality is completely normal. Their lives are shaped by daily foraging, manual labor, candlelit nights, and constant vigilance against external threats. The older generation retains memories of how easy life used to be, but those memories fade and become less relevant with each passing month. Survival becomes a daily grind of harvesting, hunting, scavenging, and defending against threats. New cultural norms and social structures emerge, creating smaller, more isolated worlds within the larger darkness. The blackout stops being a temporary event that people are waiting to end. Instead, it becomes a permanent way of life that defines everything about how society functions. Now, the scenario I've just described is absolutely harrowing, but it's not without hope. And understanding these vulnerabilities in our infrastructure is vital, but recognizing our capacity for resilience and adaptation is equally important. The biggest deadly mistake that most people make when disaster strikes is trying to go it alone. Solitary survival efforts might work for a few days or weeks, but long-term survival in a crisis of this magnitude depends entirely on community cooperation.
The groups that pool their resources, establish common goals, and organize effective defenses have dramatically better chances of survival. Trust, collaboration, and shared knowledge become the absolute foundations of resilience. Another critical mistake is focusing on the wrong resources. Most people think about stockpiling food and water, which is important, but they completely overlook the skills that become essential when technology fails. When the power grid collapses, practical skills become the new currency. Blacksmithing, carpentry, midwifery, horticulture, and herbal medicine become incredibly valuable. These aren't just useful skills, they're the difference between communities that thrive and communities that collapse. The revival of traditional ways of living becomes absolutely essential. When modern infrastructure fails, water truly becomes life itself.
When the municipal taps run dry, every other aspect of high-tech civilization crumbles along with them. The ability to grow your own food, purify water from questionable sources, and craft essential goods becomes paramount for survival. But here's what gives me hope about humanity. Despite all the horrors we've discussed, the looting, violence, disease outbreaks, and even rare cases of cannibalism, humans are remarkably adaptable creatures. We innovate when we're backed into corners, and we band together when cooperation becomes the only viable option. Communities can and do rebuild. They generate small amounts of power through ingenuity. They establish stable mini-societies that produce enough food and maintain enough security for people to survive and even begin to thrive again. The scenario of long-term grid failure is genuinely grim, but it's absolutely not without hope. Understanding the vulnerabilities in our infrastructure is crucial, but recognizing our capacity for resilience and adaptation is equally important. Preparation, practical skill development, and strong community relationships are the keys to not just surviving, but actually rebuilding in the face of a disaster. The scenario we've just explored together isn't science fiction. It's a very real possibility that electrical grid experts and government agencies actively plan for every single day. The question isn't whether you believe it could happen to us. The question is whether you and your family will be prepared when it does happen. This kind of preparation doesn't happen overnight, and it definitely doesn't happen after the crisis begins. Start building your preparedness foundation today. Learn practical skills that don't depend on electricity. Build relationships with your neighbors and local community. Create modest stockpiles of essential supplies. Because when the lights finally go out for good, it's already too late to begin preparing. If this video opened your eyes to just how fragile our modern world really is, hit that like button and subscribe to Pantry for more scenarios that will change how you think about preparedness. And remember, the strongest communities are always the ones that stand together. In darkness, we find new ways to adapt, innovate, and support one another. The bonds and skins that make us human are exactly what will carry us through when everything else fails.